If you know me, you may know that my taste in plants is, unique. Mostly in plants I don't like. Like Boom Balloon, which people have been trying to convince me for months is not just banana, but again, they are wrong. It totally is, and I will die in this bloody hill. But also my favourite plants. You can tell this by the fact you clicked on a video about my favourite plant in PvZ2. Spikeweed. Yes, this is my favourite plant. Not soybean, not banana, not Mega Gatling or some other plant like that, no. It's Spikeweed. Because unlike these insuperior peons, Spikeweed is actually cool. Very cool. And this is a video dedicated to Spikeweed. This video will be very cool. This is the natural order of things, and you cannot stop it. Okay, so let's just get into it, Spikeweed is a weed plant that was introduced in AltverZ Zombies 1, specifically during the pool levels. It's not particularly great in AltverZ Zombies 1 because of the fact the following worlds are both filled with water, and one world just totally shuts out Spikeweed as an option, but it was there and we should cover it as a result. Spikeweed in all incarnations is immune to the vast majority of zombies, as it's simply too low to the ground to be hit. The main exceptions in the first game are Zombonis and Gargantuas. Zombonis will die instantly if they touch Spikeweed, but Spikeweed will also be destroyed in the process. Gargantuas, on the other hand, will treat Spikeweed the same way they treat any other plant, as in, they bonk it really hard with a long stick, and it magically disappears. This is a fairly significant weakness, but much less prominent than its other weakness, that being that it can't be planted on roofs of pools. It's not exactly viable, or even usable, in a large chunk of AltverZ Zombies 1. However, its abilities are still unique. When zombies are over it, Spikeweed will, well, spike. It has a pretty fast fire rate, and does the same amount of damage per attack as a pea shooter, for the same cost. Unlike pea shooter, this plant is AoE, meaning that it can hit any amount of zombies that are on top of it. Important notes include that, usually, 2 Spikeweeds can clear up an infinite amount of basic zombies, forever, unless something disrupts them. This is a good showcase of a damage output, as far as I'm concerned. It's pretty effective overall, though it isn't taking buckets down alone, and cones are a genuine issue for it. In AltverZ Zombies 1, most special zombies also tend to not really care about Spikeweed, though it can pierce screen doors and newspapers, which may prove valuable somehow. It's also important to remember that the player can use Spikeweed as an emergency option against Zombonis and catapults, as the player can use it similar to an instant plant to kill these instantly. Regardless, it received some noticeable changes in Plants vs Zombies 2. Firstly, it got a new design, which I honestly much prefer over Plant vs Zombies 1's. It feels more planty, and feels more like a spiky weed than a weird sharp tree branch. In more noticeable changes, it's gained a plant food effect, which will attract all zombies on its lane to itself, and deal pretty strong damage. Otherwise, main differences are in different hitboxes, which seem to make Spikeweed more consistent overall, and in the game overall. In Plants vs Zombies 2, a lot more zombies can counter it, such as Excavator, and a new type of zombie in Flying Zombies will be totally immune to its damage. However, with wider variety in specials, Spikeweed has a lot more potential targets than in Plants vs Zombies 1, which makes it much more appealing. It also doesn't have to deal with nearly as much water or roost now, as only Big Wave Beach has water which blocks it off, which is convenient for it. I should also cover some mods briefly here. Most mods don't change Spikeweed much. The only noticeable change tends to be gaining immunities and things. The main, and really only example, being in Eclise Alpha, where Spikeweed is immune to being frozen in frostbite caves. Beyond this, Spikeweed getting any real changes is exceptionally rare. And now that we've covered what Spikeweed is, let's begin by saying why Spikeweed is so interesting in a pair of words. Simply versatile. Spikeweed is an insanely easy plant to understand. Its ability is very simple. It damages zombies that walk over it. But this plant manages to find so much interesting strategy, and requires so much interesting thought to use truly effectively, while still remaining incredibly versatile, capable of anything you really want from it. And I'm gonna explain why this is. I'm also mostly talking about Plant vs Zombies 2 Spikeweed here, and Spikeweed in PvZ2 mods, more specifically. In PvZ2, Spikeweed is kinda trash because that game isn't balanced, And in Plant vs Zombies 1, Spikeweed is alright, but not too interesting. Okay? Okay. The first important thing about Spikeweed is the way it interacts with special zombies. You see, in PvZ2 there are a lot of targets that Spikeweed can help with, because a lot of zombies have interesting abilities. Prospector is a great example, as Prospectors will leave a right side of the screen fairly quickly, but 2 columns of Spikeweed can totally shut them down, while also providing general damage support. This extends to other zombies, too. Zombies like Wizard can be dealt with quite nicely with Spikeweed, both suiting them as transformations and capable of dealing some great damage to them, for an example. Spikeweed is also a pretty solid damage support. Dealing small chip damage to most enemies reliably is pretty helpful to any plan in the game, often making single target plans have a much stronger chance against swarms of enemies. This is because they can clear out weak enemies with less attacks, and perhaps totally ignore them. This is also combined with the fact that, due to its ability, Spikeweed will rarely be taking over valuable tiles of space, instead making use of tiles you likely won't be using otherwise, and sometimes using sun you otherwise wouldn't be using. This isn't to say that Spikeweed is easy to slap onto any strategy though. You see, Spikeweed does have weaknesses. Pretty significant ones actually. Most notably, Gargantua's totally shut it down. If you see Gargantua's, just don't bring Spikeweed. It's not worth it. Otherwise, Spikeweed is fairly expensive. Unless you're specifically running tier 3 Spikeweed in Eclise, but Spikeweed costing 100 sun is a fairly high amount for what can sometimes be a fairly middling plant. Remember, you need 2 to kill basics, and you have no chance against Coneheads. It's a plant that has its main benefit in the mid game, and this is a fact you need to keep in mind. But, and here's a big part that keeps it relevant, Spikeweed has synergies with some of the most interesting plants in the game, and it makes Spikeweed honestly great fun to use. Firstly, wall plants. I adore using walls in Plant vs Zombies 2, but alone they are utterly useless, die to hordes, and are unable to generate damage. A certain prickly weed, as a result, is a massive help with these guys, allowing walls to deal constant damage, help clearing out hordes, and otherwise generally assist wall plants. This goes beyond placing them at the column ahead, too, as Spikeweed's passive damage elsewhere can be of great help. We also have synergy with all forms of stalling plants, both instas and reliable slowers. Plants like Snopey are great early game plants, and they can help turn a Spikeweed's damage into a more prominent force, as its damage essentially doubles, much more so than other plants. This also happens to go around full circle with walls, too. Spikeweed can clear out hordes for your walls, allowing them to take more damage, and clear out zombies so Snopey can stall better. Snopey stalling allows Spikeweed's damage to increase by a lot against single targets, and your walls will have more functional HP, while those walls offer defense against singular tough enemies. It's just a super neat combo that drops all the way around. But also works with stalling misses too. The ability to slow zombies to cheap, then place a Spikeweed beneath them is shockingly helpful. It can help totally cover the issues with Spikeweed in the early game. Using a Stunion, then placing a Spikeweed underneath a group of zombies, is a great way to deal some significant damage for fairly cheap, as is spamming knockback instances like Stolia, or other knockbacks such as Charge Guard, which is kind of insult-like, I guess, which can help Spikeweed rack up damage quick against even tougher foes. Spikeweed also has some more unique synergies, such as with Citron, as an example, as clearing out basics allows it to use all its shots on Cones Plus. It can help deal with chip damage on enemies that it barely can't kill. It also works pretty nicely with plants like Chomper for similar reasons, being a relatively cheap support that can form a strong mid-game together. Despite its seeming simplicity, there's a ton of ways you can use Spikeweed and adapt it for any scenario, with a lot of interesting synergies for both the seed select and on the battlefield, a ton of small ways to optimize it, and just generally being a fun plan to use. I suppose it's simply just versatile, but there's also more that I love about Spikeweed, because, unlike so many other plants, Spikeweed is a universal constant, and that makes it very cool. Let's look at Red Stinger. What does it do? Now this may seem like a strange question, but there's several answers, and all of them are going to be wrong. Because Red Stinger doesn't have a set thing it can do. It always changes, and always changes significantly. In every mod I've played, Red Stinger has done something different, and as a result, it's a plant you need to relearn in every single mod you play. In Eclise, it's a long recharge plant that shoots. In AltverZ, it's a slightly stronger pea shooter with walling capability. In Nightcast, it's something. In Plant vs Zombies 2, it's a cheap repeater that's only plantable in 3 columns, and so on and forth. All of these need to be used, managed, and otherwise built around in different ways. This isn't a bad thing, overall, but it can make learning how to play a new mod difficult, and if every plant was like that, mods wouldn't be very fun. Spikeweed is unique in this regard, because Spikeweed never changes. I'm yet to play a mod where Spikeweed was significantly changed. Heck, its stats are usually untouched, and it makes this plant really easy to use and pick up. It's eternal, and you have access to a really solid plant that you can usually rely on. It's not super strong or anything, but because it's insane, and often helps tap into some mod's unique aspects, due to its extremely synergistic nature with other plants in general. Being consistent also just helps mods keep grounded, to me. I'm all for super unique plants, but if there's too many, you tend to be unable to make solid strategy and things get confusing. Plants like Spikeweed keep things rooted in reasonability. It means that no matter how chaotic things get, you always have at least one option that will work just how you think. Sure, other plants also do this. Pea shooter, repeater for instance. But Spikeweed is a more unique plant, and again, helps lean into mods more unique plants, that don't feel the former really do. Also, not having to relearn every single plant is super important, as you need time to readjust a new strategy. Without Spikeweed, it would be much harder to find usage of a lot of plants. Ultimately, its presence in any mod as a sort of global plant everybody can use and understand is valuable. Anyways, now that I've covered my favourite plant and a lot of things about it, there's 2 other plants I feel I need to bring up. These obviously being the 2 other weeds, Spike Rock and Iceweed. Spike Rock is a fairly simple plant, and I can't go on about much, though I do think it's a fun evolution of Spikeweed. Its damage output is doubled, which makes it even better synergetically, but also arguably far more reliant on it. Spikeweed benefits from synergies, but is still usable without, while I feel Spike Rock is incapable of working well without support to bring it out. It makes it less a plant in a lot of cases, but I don't mind it too much, as I feel that makes walls a better option, which I much prefer being the case. However, it also has the ability to break certain zombies instantly, like Spikeweed, but improved. Able to remove 3 things instead of just 1, and also tanky 3 gargantual hits instead of 1. These aren't necessarily super important traits, but I do seriously like the fact that it has these, as it's just an interesting way to develop Spikeweed further in all directions, and can occasionally come in handy. Just a sign of a good plant to me, considering its origins as an upgrade plant. I should note that running Spikeweed and Spike Rock is usually wasting one of their slots. For the record, just don't do this ever. The pair don't work well together, and this extends Iceweed too, presumably. I want to start by clearing up that I haven't ever used Iceweed. No mod currently has Iceweed as a plant, and in vanilla I highly doubt it of any use, because vanilla balancing is just a failure. However, based on its current principles, I can say that I despise Iceweed. Iceweed is a spikeweed that chills things it spikes. Very simple, but ruins a lot of what I loved about Spikeweed, as its purpose is now significantly less interesting. It doesn't seem like an effective staller, Cold Snapdragon is simply better, and its damage now relies entirely on slowdown as opposed to being benefited by it. This just makes it so much less energetic to a point it doesn't seem interesting, becoming a debatedly super simplified version of Spikeweed to use. Though again, I haven't used Iceweed, and most likely won't ever, so I can't say for sure. Maybe I am totally wrong about this, and this does do things that are cool. I don't know. Still, I felt the need to bring it up just in case, as this video wouldn't really be complete without talking about every single weed in the game. Oh, also, I want this video to be longer, so I'm just gonna complain about why I think certain plants are just bad. Ha. In general, I tend to find myself disliking a lot of modern plants, due to a mixture of overcomplication and just being given random key abilities to differentiate, which often either don't do a whole lot, or just don't matter. Boom Balloon is my key example, as its unique, differentiating trait is often secondary to just using it like banana, as in just spawning the balloons over zombies directly, with little benefit to placing them further left in most cases, from my perspective, which to me renders the plant mostly useless. Other plants to me are too complex or too specific for me to really care for. Draftadil is a plant that slows some zombies to half speed into lane, stuns enemies with shots, and has a percentage chance to just one-shot a ton of enemies when shrunk or when they are in a certain state. This is too much for a single plant to do for me, and I don't consider it a great plant for it. It doesn't open up any interesting play options, due to being specific, but those plants simply do so much that other plants don't support in interesting ways. Turkey pult is another example of a plant I just don't care for. It's literally just a weird soybean, and I don't see any value in having turkey pult as a result, beyond making a set of plants that look more diverse than they actually are. This feeling of plants being introduced or made solely for fake diversity is something I feel often with a lot of newer plants, and especially with a lot of custom plants I've seen. Eclise Alpha and Crystal Shroom are the best examples to me. Garlemite is theoretically interesting, but in general it's just a worked garlic with no heavy usage, never adding much in terms of strategy, especially due to the sun meta giving far too much sun for it to be used instead of garlic. Crystal Shroom is just a worse version of many of the stolers, mostly existing to counter 2 zombie types total, having very little usage outside of dealing with explorers and prospectors compared to Snowy and Sapling. Neither plant are very important, and feel like they exist solely to exist. This isn't necessarily a huge problem, but in terms of individual plants, these don't seem particularly strong. And once you've played with a lot of mods, you start to really notice plants that do so little, and it becomes an actual problem, at least to me. You start to notice that you really begin to default to certain strategies, and so many plants feel so unappealing as a result. I think it's interesting to note that so many modern plants never appear in mods, nor do people particularly go for them ever, or when they do, they tend to be incredibly tricky to balance. Ultimato is the best example. People do consistently try to get them to work, most incarnations don't really create a compelling plant, and in general, Ultimato ends up being unbounceable and not particularly valuable in its place in the mod. But this also isn't to say that these plants have no potential. A lot of plants have potential to be super interesting or do something very unique, but it's down to the mod developer to find what is unique about plants which, for the most part, really don't matter, nor people particularly like. Some plants show up a lot more than others. I've seen like 4 different mods go, oh, I want a modern plant to be unique and quirky, then put Inferno in. It's consistently Inferno, it's kind of a joke at this point. Could be a mistake, could be a good thing. We really just have to wait and see for Inferno and the rest of the modern plants to probably start appearing, eh? Did I just spend, insert time here, talking about a plant that nobody else cares about? Yes. Yes, I did. Well, I also spent it talking about other things, but shh. Do I care? No, not particularly. Spikeweed is a plant I've always really liked, and I honestly probably always will. It's just a solid default plant that has some very fun applications, and I think stands as the gold standard of Plant vs Zombies plants in general. Simple to understand, doesn't have inherent complexity, but can be used in complex ways. It doesn't have pointless abilities, it doesn't have anything random, but does have interesting mechanics due to the way its abilities interact, and does have interesting synergies due to its simplicity. And as a result, Spikeweed is my favourite plant. But I'm kinda curious what other people's are, so I'm asking you guys what your favourite plants are. Commenting below helps you do crap, you know this goes, and this is my trick to get you to do that. Evil laughter intensifies. Oh wait, I wasn't meant to read that. Anyway, subscribe and stuff, I don't know. Like, one of these days I will figure out how to do a proper intro. Today is not that day. Bye.